Moved and seconded, and so we'll just put that, all those in favour say aye, and against, carried. Thank you. Right, the next item is the final report on the preparatory work for the Auckland Integrated Transport Plan, and while the team come up, yeah, so there are some chairs recs up there you can read. Just to make clear, this is a report on what has been going on and is the start of a journey in terms of this work. This is not the final outcome. So I just want to acknowledge there's been a really good collaboration between Auckland Council staff, Auckland Transport staff. There's been a steering group that has been overseeing that. Meeting up in the Mayor's office, and so this is a start of some work, so hand over to Robert and Harry and Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just before I start, if I could, I'd just like to quickly acknowledge the team who have been working hard on this for the last few months. So, you know, we've appeared in front of you 4 or 5 times now, and I'm conscious it's generally me that's doing all the talking, but there's a lot of people who've been doing all the work. So from that's the entire transport strategy team, but in particular Harry Stovold, Jose Gonzalez, Katrina Hunt and Ben Kildare. From the wider growth and infrastructure unit, Amanda Harland, Hannah Shingler, Dave Laurier and David Hawkey. And of course our colleagues at Auckland Transport, Mark Lambert, Daniel Newcomb and Robin Verstappen in particular. So thank you very much for allowing me to say that. So I'd just like to provide a little bit of context before I dive into this slide. And as you are aware, or are becoming increasingly aware, there is a plethora of transport plans and processes that we have in Auckland. A very complex web. Some are mandated by legislation, some are not, some align with each other, some don't. And we have a diagram on page 8 of your attachment which attempts to set that out, and it's a simplified version of reality, but it's still nevertheless quite hard to get your head around. But despite this complex web, there's no single document that sits atop of the whole thing. There's nothing that both council and government have agreed to that takes an integrated, multimodal approach and a long-term view of what Auckland's transport future might be, and a document that can provide direction to everything else that goes on in the planning, transport planning space. So given the amount of money that is spent on transport and that is planned to be spent on transport in the years to come, given how many agencies are involved in this space, and given how important transport is to the lives of Aucklanders and to all the outcomes that council seeks, this is a pretty big gap, and it's pretty important that it's filled. And wrong button. The work that we have done to date has done nothing if not reinforce the need for such a document. I think it's also very timely if you consider what we're hearing from government, from the opposition, and importantly from the Infrastructure Commission around an urgent need to reform the way in which we plan, fund and deliver infrastructure in this country. So I think that in some ways, the work that we've done to date, and as the Chair has noted, this is the end of a phase. It is a milestone along the way, but there's a lot more to come. I think it's important. I think in some ways we can think about it in terms of this being Auckland Council's contribution to what is a broader national effort. So with that said, I'll just leap into the slide. As you'll recall, you endorsed the scope for this work. You authorised us to get on with the work back in March. Since that work has started, we've had confirmation from the government that they're committed to it as well via the GPS. The timing is still a bit uncertain around that. And the thinking or the rationale behind getting on with the preparatory work prior to government coming to the table with government was around strengthening council's position and giving us a base for the discussions with government, and that's what we've attempted to do throughout. So just to reiterate what the Chair has said, this is the preparatory work, so we're calling it the final report on the preparatory work, but it is not the AITP itself. There's still a long way to go down the track until we get there. The work was set up in such a way that it was led by council staff, but we've had invaluable and very frequent technical input from our colleagues at AT as well, so we need to acknowledge that. But as we've said in the report, we have not sought the approval of the Auckland Transport Board for this work. It has been a staff-led exercise in that sense. And the focus for the work, in line with the agreed terms of reference, has very much been on large-scale projects. Generally speaking, more than $1 billion, and we've found 50 of them on proposed or flagged by various transport agencies that have a hand in transport in Auckland. This does not mean, however, that smaller interventions are unimportant. In fact, the work has proved quite the contrary, and one of the key findings that Harry will tell you about soon is around the need for renewed focus on smaller infrastructure investments, on service improvements, on non-infrastructure interventions, regulatory interventions and the like. We've had to, or we have made a number of assumptions around those type of interventions and those type of investments, and they're set out on page 38 of the attachment. We've got a couple of them listed on there. So, for example, technology. The assumption is that technology will continue to improve and be applied to the transport network and will improve efficiency and with which Aucklanders are able to get around the city. We've made an assumption around cycling as well, that the full cycling network will be built in its entirety over the next 3 decades. So, as I say, we are not ignoring the importance of a whole range of interventions. They are critically important. It's just that the scope of this work lay elsewhere. So, just to remind you of the, and I'll assume that you've at least had a chance to glance through the report that was attached to the agenda item, and just to remind you of some of the key outputs. So as I say, we see this report very much as a milestone along the way. It's kind of the end of phase 1, the end of the initial preparatory work between Auckland Transport and ourselves, but there's still a lot more to come. So the final report is attached. It was guided by the terms of reference, and a number of key features to it, probably front and centre being the stock take of these 50 projects, and the high-level assessment. As far as we're aware, that's not been done before, and certainly it's not been done in terms of a high-level assessment against council-endorsed outcomes. So this is a really important step, and Harry will have a bit more to say on that soon. We're under clear instructions to try and make it visual, which is what we've done. So we have quite a number of maps in there for you. We're not going to go through them all now. We also have something coming your way in the next day or two. That's an interactive map whereby you'll have access to digital versions of the map, and you can zoom in and have a look at different projects and hover your mouse over them and get information about it and so on and so forth. So that's on its way. Another key area of focus was the key issues or the challenges with the transport planning system as it currently stands. We conclude that elements of it are no longer fit for purpose, and there is an urgent need for reform there. And I think both sides of the political aisle will probably agree with that. We put a lot of work into identifying the 10-year transport challenges. We have a map and commentary in the report on that. And also, as I've alluded to, quite a lot of focus on the supporting interventions required in and of their own right, but also to make sure that we get the most out of pending and current really large-scale investments in the transport system. So I've probably covered most of this slide as well, but just a couple of points to reiterate there. We think this work positions council very well, both at the staff and elected member level, for the pending discussions with central government whenever they may take place. It provides an evidence base that can support that multi-agency work that's coming up, and it supports the development of an agreed Auckland view, if you like, of its transport future, although perhaps we haven't quite got there yet, and we'll get to that later in terms of the prioritisation work is still to come. And as I say, if nothing else that comes out of this work, it just reinforces the need for reform of elements of the transport planning system, with a lot of detail still to come on that yet. So I'm going to hand it over to Harry now, and now Harry has been played a pivotal role in writing the technical report that's attached to your agenda item, along with others, but Harry was a lead writer for that, so it's only right that he gets to present his parts of his work. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. So I'll just briefly summarise some of the key findings across the various work streams of the preparatory work that council staff have been undertaking. With the assistance of our colleagues at AT. As you'll see on the table on the screen, one of the most important findings is that there is projected to be a very significant gap between total cost demands, including the cost of all major projects proposed or indicated by various agencies over the next 3 decades, and the expected available funding. These are very big numbers, so I want to explain how we got to them and the caveats around them. So while there are a lot of unknowns, a rough estimate indicates that if all proposed and signal transport projects were delivered, the potential funding shortfall could be around $100 billion over 30 years, when also accounting for non-discretionary spending and consequential operational costs. Calculations like this, particularly across a 30-year horizon, which spans far beyond any statutory transport funding processes, inherently involve a lot of unknowns, and so staff needed to rely on a range of projections and assumptions. On the funding side, we extrapolated past and present trends to develop 3 future scenarios for future funding levels. We then took the middle of these 3 scenarios and used this to project the total funding provision for transport in Auckland over the next 30 years. This generates the figure of $250 billion as seen on the table, but again, this is just a projection and an extrapolation. There is a lot of uncertainty over a 30-year horizon. More information around those assumptions is available in part 2 of the attached report. We then assumed the base level costs, which are independent of decision-making around future major projects. These include committed investment, operational costs for the current network, renewals, and continuation of ongoing programs. This then brings us to one of the most significant and challenging tasks within the scope of the work, which has been to undertake a stocktake of major transport projects proposed and signalled by the wide range of agencies involved in Auckland's transport planning system. Based on the scope and criteria discussed with this committee in the past, the stocktake produced a list of 50 major future projects which we considered. Now, it is very important to note that even if funding were available, there isn't really a foreseeable future where all 50 of these projects would be needed or delivered. This is in part because the various transport planning processes have sometimes produced duplicative or conflicting projects which are not likely to be mutually deliverable. This is clearly a bit of a systemic issue, and it clearly reinforces the need for a more integrated and coordinated approach to transport planning and funding across the Auckland region. Just getting back to the table, even allowing for the fact that not all of these projects will actually be needed within 30 years, the funding gap will still be very significant in the context of current and signalled funding settings. This is particularly the case when considering the consequential operational costs of a proposed and signalled future projects, which are very substantial across a 30-year horizon. In summary, this work has shown that the current transport planning and funding systems can be complex and disjointed at times, and there can be a disconnect between what is being planned and what will likely be able to be funded. We just jump to the next slide. There we go. So in accordance with the previous signalled scope, the next step after identifying the major proposed or signalled projects which fell within the scope of the stocktake was to conduct an initial high-level assessment against key council strategic outcomes applicable to transport. As you'll see in the attached document, and as discussed at previous meetings with the TEC, these strategic outcomes are sustainability, economic growth and productivity, safety and resilience, supporting quality compact growth, and achieving value for money and affordability. Almost all of the proposed projects align well with at least some of these strategic outcomes, but only a few projects align well with every single outcome. Going forward, further technical work on the relative priority of these projects, including modelling and assessment of scenarios, will need to be a key part of the development of a robust integrated plan. This technical work will also need to be supported by future political decisions about the weighting of these strategic outcomes. But regardless of how the projects are prioritised, it is almost certainly not possible to deliver all of them under current funding settings. Therefore, a renewed focus on less capital-intensive interventions is required in order to get more out of the existing network and better leverage for major investments which are made. This includes the use of demand management tools and systems, the continued rollout of technological interventions such as smarter traffic lights, consistent investment in ongoing programs such as safety programs, cycling and network optimization, and more meaningful integration of transport with land use planning. We noted that investment hierarchies published by Auckland Council in the Future Development Strategy and the Infrastructure Strategy, as well as work by Waka Kotahi and the Infrastructure Commission Te Waihanga, have all highlighted that less capital-intensive interventions, like more integrated planning and network optimization, will be needed to support the efficient realization of benefits from larger infrastructure investments and to achieve the desired outcomes across the system within available funding. So a more comprehensive investigation of timing and phasing of investment will need to be developed through the next stages of the work on the Integrated Transport Plan alongside central government. This work has highlighted the need for any proposed package or plan going forward to be very cognizant of the broader funding and cost picture to ensure that it achieves outcomes which align with value for money and ensure affordability. To be clear, this doesn't mean that major transport projects don't have an important role in Auckland's future. They definitely do, but it does mean that a more holistic focus on achieving value for money and ensuring affordability need to be a core part of any integrated transport planning. I'll now pass back to Rob to discuss the next steps.
Thanks, Harry. So we set out in more detail on paragraph 17 of your agenda item, and also towards the back of your attachment, pages 42 to 43, there's a bit of discussion as well around what we see as being key next steps. The overarching thing, of course, being collaboration with central government agencies on the actual AITP itself. Really critical to that is, as I've said previously, some form of prioritisation work. As Harry has said, under current settings and under plausible future settings, it's extremely unlikely, if not impossible, that we'll be able to deliver all of these projects. Therefore, some form of prioritisation will be required, and that needs to be supported by more detailed analysis and ensuring that we have the most up-to-date numbers and so on, and modelling and so on and so forth. This will be a really quite significant piece of work in its own right, given the scale and the cost of the projects and given their implications for Auckland's future. So it's only right that we do it properly. Equally, this prioritisation work will have to take into account the relationships between projects, which we haven't been able to do yet in terms of both spatial and in terms of timing. If you do project A, what does that mean for project B? Can we defer it? Can it be downscaled? Does it need to be upscaled? Can it, do we even need it? That kind of analysis needs to be brought to the table as well. Now, we'll bring a great deal of technical assessment to this process, but ultimately we're going to need political direction as well on the relative weightings given to different outcomes. So we'll be looking to you for direction on that. Stepping above that, the governance structures will need thought as well for this AITP. Role of central government and local government elected officials, and of course, critical, the role of Māori in this. And you would have seen from your report, we have certainly undertaken work at a staff level to better understand what some of the implications of this might be for Māori, and we've set out a series of next steps as well. And so our recommendation is that there's a need for a Māori voice in the governance structures as well. Timing-wise, that's obviously out of our hands. Ideally, this would start soon, but in the meantime, there's stuff that Auckland Transport and ourselves can get on with to put us in an even better space for when the discussions do start. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, questions? We've got Julie.
Thank you, and thanks for this work. Noting that this is the sort of end of the beginning, if you like, I have one slight quibble that I just think, and then I've got a couple of other more important questions probably. By numbering the projects by 1 to 50, we're going to get people misread that as this is a priority list. I understand absolutely that they are north to south, but I just think we need to put that in big letters on those lists, because otherwise we're going to get,
Yeah, we can be clear about that. It didn't mean to imply any form of hierarchy, as you know, yeah.
No, and I know we've discussed that at workshop as well. I just wanted to make that clear so we can make that clearer in the documents, because otherwise, people see a number list starting with 1 and they assume number 1 is top priority. And I know we've worked through that, but I'd just like to see that captured. So when you said current funding settings, does that, how current is that? Because we are working in a little bit of a changing dynamic environment in terms of the messages from central government. So how current is current?
Yeah, so this is a 30-year plan, so we're certainly not, when coming up with those numbers, we didn't look at how existing budgets are allocated between different priorities. It was simply the quantum of funding and then three plausible future scenarios as to, extrapolating from where we're at now as to where we might be in the future. In that sense, the allocation of funds by recent announcements around the allocation of fundings to one priority or another hasn't come into it.
Great, okay. I mean, not great, but yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. And then my other question is, and again, this is probably too early, but I just want to fly the flag for it now. Put a road cone there to draw attention perhaps. Is the costing stuff, how that's going to evolve, acknowledging that some of these projects are going to be big enough that potentially we are going to have to look at that compensation piece. And I know it's way too early to start putting any numbers, but a lot of these are very significant disruption projects. So how we're potentially going to look at that, how that might interact with some of that temporary traffic management plan stuff, which again can drive some of the costs as well. So I guess just flagging up that these might be the kind of projects where we need to look at those kinds of externalities, calculating them, and then actually thinking about how can we cover them in the project.
And you would expect that to be the case, but we would expect that would be worked into the individual business cases and costings for each of the projects, which will be, fed into this process. And at those costings on a case-by-case basis will presumably align with whatever the policy is set by government and council.
Yeah, thanks. I really just wanted to flag it as something that we're going to have to think about in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie, and I'll get this right before the end of the day. So the Mayor's going to move this and I'm going to second it. Good things take time. Mayor Wayne Brown.
Thanks very much. I've got a bit of a comment and that followed, which leads to questions. This is a great piece of work. Thank you very much, Harry and Robert and others. It sets us up well for the future to work with the government on the integrated transport plan, which was moved from just an idea I had in the campaign to now a real thing. And when you listen to it, it's amazing it didn't exist. I suspected things were out of whack with transport planning in Auckland with various competing agencies and political promises, but this $100 billion gap between committed funding and projects is a real shock and shows we do have a problem here. This is not the fault of any particular party, but has built up over the last 20 years, and it shows we need much better coordination across the various transport agencies in Auckland, and shows we need to focus less on mega projects and more on right-sized small and medium projects that actually solve our problems. So my questions are, firstly, one is how do we do things cheaper, which means because you either don't do them if you're $100 billion short, or you do them cheaper. So how do we get the scope and the standard down to something which is affordable? And secondly, how do we move this away from the ATAP? It sounds like you're doing quite a good job getting it away from ATAP, which was a list of projects rather than a pressure on costs. It was just a ranking, so we ranked down the thing and said, oh, we won't do these ones. Or instead of going back and saying, well, really, you know, can we spread the money further by doing a whole lot of cheaper things? Because what you're defining here is how much money we've got, rather than what everyone wants. And so with that money, how do we, and you've identified a lot of the smaller, cheaper things are get you down the track further. Demand management rather than these big things. So it's getting this pressure on costs. How's the best way we do that? That's my main thing. It's what comes out of this. We've got to do it cheaper. And it doesn't mean to say badly either. It just means cheaper.
Well, I guess the main response to that could be that by its very nature, by bringing all these things together and better understanding the relationship between them and when we might need these things and you know, if we do A, we don't need B kind of thing, then that inherently is a major contributor to savings in the future. And likewise the direction to focus on smaller scale investments and non-infrastructural interventions as well, likewise as well. Harry or Mark, do either of you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll support what's been said in terms of we need a single approach to this. So we need to actually look at what are we trying to achieve from the transport system first of all, what's the objectives, what's the challenges, and how does that link to land use and everything else. So what are we trying to achieve? Then how do you actually optimise what we've already got through different programmes? Then you should be looking at the project interventions and looking across all the different agencies, bring them all together and actually looking at every project and how it relates to other projects, how you can cut them down and how it can be multimodal from day one. What we've had in the past is very much an ad hoc approach. So I think that's the key around governance as well to start off with.
Yeah, I agree with what both Rob and Mark have said. Just in terms of what we've got in the report itself, on the start of page 4, we sort of highlight the investment hierarchy that was in Auckland Council's future development strategy. But there's a very similar approach clearly put forward in Auckland Council's infrastructure strategy, as well as work done by Waka Kotahi and Te Waihanga New Zealand Infrastructure Commission. And they all show that there is kind of a multi-rung approach where generally first you want to consider integrated planning, which in this context is going to mean much better integration of transport and land use. The next rung being demand management, then optimization of existing systems, and then new infrastructure as the final rung. Not that new infrastructure is never required, but that the others should be considered first. And I think that's been highlighted as one of the core ways to address the widest range of issues within the constrained budget.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that everyone should really read this. 7, item 7 says what's wrong. 8B is a very good thing. We've got to get cheaper. Over on the context page, there's uncoordinated approach. Is no longer fit for purpose. There's such a lot of good stuff here, team, that on the start here, pages 4 and 5, 3, 4 and 5. It really is good stuff. I just hope councillors read this, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Angela.
Thank you. And agree with Mia. Thank you for all of the work that you've done on this. One of the things that you spoke about, Harry, I think it was, the politics around it and how it can provide uncertainty when you've got a pipeline that long. There was a report that Infrastructure New Zealand commissioned Infometrics to do called Estimating the Cost of an Uncertain Infrastructure Pipeline. And I wondered how much having something like that at an Auckland level that would feed up to something at a national level would help the success of having a pipeline of activity, removing so it can survive political terms and give certainty to the market. So what the report tells us is that there is no certainty to the infrastructure market. There is no certainty for businesses to gear up and to hire people and to invest in their own equipment because there is no certainty of pipeline. That's got to help with the costs once they get estimated for real. So it helps to reduce costs, it helps invest into the economy, and it keeps certainty for 30 years, whatever it is. How do we factor something like that as a piece of work around the work that you're doing, or to run alongside it?
I might have to leave it to Rob and Mark to answer the how, but can just confirm but yeah, one of the key findings of the work is that a more stable and consistent long-term infrastructure pipeline is a key step to potentially reducing the costs of delivery and making it more achievable to deliver more of the projects and solutions that Auckland wants to deliver within a constrained funding environment.
So it's the how that we're missing.
I think, so we as officials can put forward, our assessments and how we think things, what the optimal path might be for Auckland over a 30-year period, and that can get buy-in from the elected officials of the day. But ultimately, these are huge decisions about Auckland's future involving many billions of dollars worth of investment, and future elected officials will want to have their say on that, of course. So I think it's really hard for officials to provide advice on how you can take the politics out of these kind of decisions, because I'm not sure. We can do our best, as I say, to set up the path and make our recommendations and provide a future pathway that everyone buys into. But things change, politics change, priorities change.
Thanks, Rob. Andy and Barry, I wonder if it's something that we can have it put on the agenda somewhere. I have spoken with Jazz about this, and I think if we could have a serious conversation about what that looks like, if it's something that we can grapple with to implement, appreciating politicians are going to want to have a say, but we've got to have what you've got in there, the rail networks, the big long-term projects, having certainty over those significant pieces of infrastructure, I think is something you would hope that all politicians might agree on for the future of Auckland.
Sorry, the only thing I would add is that there shouldn't be any reason why you can't agree a long-term direction, at least, or a set of directions within a 30-year plan. The problem, obviously, we have is if projects get cancelled or you get spending a certain amount going down that path of a project, and then it gets shifted in terms of priorities and things like that. So I think part of the next work needs to be looking at how do you get a long-term set of directions which are actually very robust, or at least relatively flexible, that don't actually create that uncertainty. You can actually create a pipeline. Yes, of course, there'll always be the odd project here and there, or there'll obviously be priorities, but to use a term that the infrastructure minister quoted last week, how do we get bipartisan approach? Now, that might be a very idealistic approach, but the government's already talking about doing that. And it's about the direction, it's about the intent, it's about how much do you focus on public transport versus roads as a flexible parameter within the report, within the plan itself, not necessarily the list of projects.
I think it's a pragmatic ideology, though. Thank you.
Given that this is a 30-year program, is there any modelling that's informed this about, say, within the short to medium term, the adoption of full self-drive, robo-taxi, cab model, non-ownership, and all of the other changes that are occurring, the dramatic drop in battery cost, solar, the convergence of all these technologies that's currently being driven by many, many billions of dollars in investment in China, in the United States and the like. So how does this series of projects reflect some modelling along the lines that I'm describing? Has that modelling happened?
Thank you, Councillor. So just in line with the scope of this work, there hasn't been any new modelling undertaken yet as part of this preparatory work, but the preparatory work does flag the need for modelling of future scenarios and land use modelling and demand modelling to be an essential part of the next step of developing the plan. This stage is kind of getting the building blocks together, and then that needs to be supplemented by further work, bringing it all together into an integrated plan. However, to facilitate the high-level initial assessment of projects, a set of assumptions had to be landed on, and that did use the kind of existing work that's out there, the assumptions and modelling which underpins existing plans, such as the future development strategy. And those plans have definitely, and perhaps to varying degrees, but have considered the changing levels of technology and some of the impacts that may have on the transport system going forward. But doing that more comprehensively is definitely something that needs to be done as part of the next stage of the work to make sure that we've got the most robust evidence base possible feeding into the integrated transport plan itself.
So my follow-on question is, when are we going to do this? Because these changes are imminent and they impact on the assumptions, the outcomes here around deaths, around spending, around reducing emissions, around all of these things so phenomenally that it's a fundamental change. So when are we actually going to do this work?
So in the context of this work, or the next phase of this work, I presume, but don't know, that there'll be a terms of reference that will provide the scope for the work. And I presume, but don't know, that this committee will have an opportunity to shape that terms of reference. And so if that's a specific thing that you want us to do as part of that, then that will be the opportunity for us to define exactly what it is that you're asking and exactly what it is that's possible. But yeah, I mean, you're asking some really big questions there, so there'll be a lot of work needed to think about just, well, how does that translate into a piece of work, and then how does that apply to what we're trying to do here?
Yeah, reserve my right to speak.
Richard?
Thanks, Chair. The unfunded mandate, I guess, of the $100 billion that you say that is, I guess, a gap, does that include what we've seen in the NLTP? There's sort of $6 billion there unfunded. They've, I think, for the first time borrowed $3 billion and granted the transport budget $3 billion. Is that the sort of gap you're projecting out, or is that so that is not funded in the normal way? And that's just a 3-year budget, I guess.
No, so it's simply, okay, so on the funding side, it was, okay, what is the 10-year funding that we have available now? What has been the growth patterns of it in the past? And then extrapolating it forward, as I say, with three different plausible scenarios, and we've taken the mid one for the numbers that you've just seen, so that's the funding side. The cost side was the most up-to-date information we could find on each of these projects and simply adding them together, and then a calculation around consequential OPEX, and also taking the base investment at the moment that we do, and again extrapolating that forward as well. So looking the type of issue that you raise is probably a level of detail that we haven't gone into. We've just looked at the very high level numbers.
Thank you. And over time, this is probably complex, but you obviously understand it. Obviously the government want to lean harder into the ETS, and these projects would end up long term, especially over a 30-year period, kind of smashing those climate budgets. And would over time you be able to extrapolate this budget onto what the effect is for Auckland on the ETS, on the carbon pricing and things like that? Because they're not aiming on the climate emissions reduction projects. They're saying we'll lean harder into the ETS, but these sort of mega projects will have an effect on. I know it's not in this early stage, but will you be able to do that sort of modelling?
Well, I mean, we would like to, but the information is hugely variable from project to project in terms of emissions impacts and so on. So whether or not we have a methodology that can take it all as a package and then assess what impact that may have on emissions over a long period of time, I'm unsure. I don't know if such a methodology exists. I mean, Auckland Transport may have more information on that. But if it doesn't exist, then it should. Yeah.
And the last question, just does the costs include the renewal focus? So obviously, East-West Link and those bigger projects for an Auckland captured figure, that's going to add significantly, do we have road space, square meters, what does that look like for the future if we move to a more large project-based changes?
Yes, it does. So that $70 billion figure that I mistakenly referred to as consequential OPEX is consequential costs, I should say. So it's both CAPEX and OPEX.
Thank you.
Okay, no further questions? All right, thanks team. You can make your way back, and then tonight you can put your feet up and just think what a good job you've done. So well done. Okay, discussion. Wayne?
Make the comment, and I may be a bit of a crack record, but Tony Seba, who's probably one of the most intelligent futurists, has been 100% accurate in his predictions so far in his forecasts. So all you've got to do is just pick up on the changes that are occurring in significant drop in batteries, the lowering in the cost of EVs. There are a whole lot of things that are converging. And there's an inevitability around it, especially full self-drive, where the technology already exists to produce virtually zero accidents, and that will be driving the model. So will economics. So I just can't emphasise enough that it's imperative to actually take these things into consideration, because if you, Andy, have got an opportunity to just have a vehicle materialise, it'll just be at the door there, and it will take you to your destination cheaper than any form of public transport, faster, more conveniently, with zero accidents and the like, 9 times out of 10, or maybe 10 times out of 10. That's the choice that you'll make. And if you own it, and there's a model whereby you can recoup all of your expenses by effectively having other people use it, so you're actually making money out of your vehicle, you'll do that. And this is in the short to medium term, not even the long term. So it's critical that we reappraise the projects we've got. It's critical that we reappraise the emissions, the deaths and the injuries, the expenditure, the projects and the like, on the basis of this technology. And it really surprises me that we're not ahead of that, because that's where we solve our funding gap.
Okay. Any other discussion? Morris? Thank goodness for that. Yeah. Okay, so, and yeah, I think it is good work, and so thank you to the team. And I think when you talk about the politics, if we use this as a tool to identify the problem to the solution to problems that we have long term, the political side of it will be coming at that time when we decide to put those plans into place to solve those problems. That's when the political debate will happen. But this is about how we find a solution for the things that we know we need. Is it an east-west? Is it freight? Is it whatever? If we use this as identifying the solution to certain transport problems, all of the other stuff will fall into line, and then whoever's around will have a massive political debate about how it's funded and what the priorities are. Okay, it's been moved, it's been seconded. Those in favour say aye, and against, carried. Righty ho, we're into the processional stuff, Wayne. I hope you're ready. So the first item is the update on decisions from the meeting of the 8th. We've seen that. Wayne's moved it. His cousin has seconded it. Is there any discussion? None. Those in favour say aye, and against, carried. The next item is the review of our forward work programme. John and his cousin have moved and seconded. Any discussion? Those in favour say aye, against, carried. Finally, the summary of our information memoranda, etc. He's gone. Morris will move that. Desi will second. Any discussion? None. All those in favour say aye, and against, carried. There's no extraordinary business. Before we go, I want to acknowledge Mara, who is about to leave us to go on maternity leave. Well, true, she will, as far as she can probably, Wayne, on Pickham. Mara, good luck for what's coming. Enjoy it when you move into my hood. You've been an absolute champion, and we'll miss you around here. And Taryn is taking over, so welcome. But thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone online. Thanks to Barry and the team here. Nice work. Thank you, Al, for your positive affirmation before.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair.